I forgave her for the affair. What I didn't expect was to meet the two little girls she never told me about. Hey there, friends, and welcome back. I didn't think I'd be telling this story, but sometimes life has a strange way of pulling you out of the quiet. I was halfway through my afternoon nap when the low buzz of the intercom by my bedside jarred me awake. Still a little groggy, I leaned over and pressed the button. "There's a woman here who'd like to see you, sir," came the soft voice of my assistant, Claire, floating through the speaker. I rubbed my eyes and sighed. "I'm tied up right now, Claire. Could you ask Maddie to see what she wants?" Madeline. Maddie handled most of my appointments and visitors these days. If I'm being honest, I wasn't busy at all. I'd sort of retreated into myself over the years. That nap? It had become part of my routine. Claire knew that, which made the interruption unusual. "She says it's personal, urgent, and insists it's something only you can handle," Claire replied. I muttered under my breath. All right. Tell her to come up. Give me 5 minutes." I climbed out of bed and splashed some cold water on my face in the bathroom to snap myself awake. Then I made my way through the penthouse to my office, still fighting off the lingering haze of sleep. As I looked out the massive windows, taking in the sprawling cityscape below, a familiar wave of bitterness washed over me. I despised this place. Every inch of it. I didn't just hate the building, I hated what it had come to represent. I hated the buzz of the city, the fake smiles in the elevators, and probably every single one of the employees working on the 17 floors beneath me. And yes, they all worked for me. Claire entered the office without knocking as she usually did now. There wasn't much point in knocking. This office was rarely occupied anymore. I was just a figurehead now, someone who stuck around because I didn't really know where else to go, or what else to do. The woman she was supposed to show in breezed right past Claire, almost like she had rehearsed it. But I could tell that the sheer scale and elegance of the place knocked her off balance a bit. She was trying to put on a bold front, but the sudden grandeur of my surroundings seemed to have caught her off guard. She looked like someone who wasn't used to high-rise offices and glass towers. "Mr. Jonathan Carter?" she asked before Claire had a chance to introduce her properly. "That's me," I said, straightening up a bit. "My name is Rachel Monroe from Ridgeway Social Services." She announced it like it was supposed to mean something, like the title should have some weight behind it. Maybe it was meant to put me on the back foot. "And what can I do for you, miss? Or is it Mrs. Monroe?" I asked. "Please just call me Rachel," she replied quickly, a little disoriented now. We try to keep things informal. She was clearly thrown off, by me, by the setting, by the fact that I wasn't what she had expected. This woman was used to dealing with people in tight spots, not someone like me. I could see she was floundering a bit, trying to regain her footing. "All right then, Rachel. You can call me John. Now, how can I help you?" Before she could answer, I glanced at Claire. "Thanks, Claire. You can leave us now." Claire gave me a curious glance, smiled slightly, and exited the room, closing the heavy door behind her. Rachel Monroe was striking. Beautiful, really. I'd seen her type before, more than once. Over the years, a few hopeful women had found some very creative ways of getting into this room. And into my life. "All right, Rachel," I said, my tone steady. "Now that we're alone, what brings you here?" "I'm sorry, John. Like I said, I'm with Ridgeway Social Services," Rachel repeated, a little more cautiously this time. "Yes, you've mentioned that already, twice actually," I said, offering a tight smile. "Now, maybe you could get to the part where I come into all this?" She shifted in her seat and gave the room another glance. It was clear she hadn't anticipated the luxury. The polished oak shelves, the wall of glass behind me overlooking the skyline, it wasn't her usual setting. She looked like she was trying to ground herself in unfamiliar territory. "There's a situation. Honestly, I'm not even sure where to start," she said finally. Her hands fidgeted slightly as she spoke. "There are 2 children involved. Their mother attempted to take her own life." She paused there, maybe expecting a reaction. I kept quiet, just letting the weight of that settle between us. "Look," she continued, "maybe it's better if you just read this." She reached into her bag and pulled out a plain envelope. It was found beside her when they took her in. I took it from her and gave the envelope a glance before setting it down on my desk for the moment. I didn't like surprises, and this one was starting to feel personal. The next morning, I walked into my office with that envelope still in my coat pocket. I'd barely had time to process the situation. The week had been chaos. For the second time, the commute had turned into a disaster. Some kind of traffic mess again, the kind that makes you want to crawl out of your skin. As I stepped inside, Laura, my secretary, well, she technically looked after a handful of us execs, spun around in her chair like she'd been waiting for me all morning. "John, seriously, where have you been?" she snapped. "And why is your phone off again?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the dead device. "Forgot to charge it," I muttered. Again. That had been happening more often lately. Truth was, by the time I got home at night, I was so worn out I couldn't think straight, barely managed to eat dinner before collapsing on the couch. Then came Tony, storming into the doorway like he owned the place. "Giordano's backing out again," he barked. "You handled him before, guess it's your turn to try again." I swallowed a sigh. "Why can't you go yourself for once?" I thought, but didn't dare say it aloud. Tony and his brother Robert were slowly driving the company into the ground, and I was the one stuck holding the pieces. I often wondered why I didn't speak my mind more. Maybe because if I did, I'd be packing up my desk within the hour. "I'll give Simon Jarvis a ring," I said instead. "He's reasonable. We've worked with him for years." "No, you're flying out there," Tony shot back, already halfway down the hall. "We need this deal locked in. Period." That was the problem lately. Our whole industry was collapsing on itself. British manufacturing was being forced to stand on its own for the first time in years. And when the banks started calling in company overdrafts, the money dried up fast. Engineering firms across the country folded almost overnight. Meanwhile, Henry Jordan, one of the more ruthless players in the game, had been scooping up the scrap. He'd buy failing factories for peanuts, clean up their old machinery, then flip it for a fortune to companies overseas who didn't know any better. Henry was a die-hard conservative, the kind who believed in winners and losers, no middle ground. And somehow, those profits of his? They never quite made their way back to the board. But if it all went south, I already knew who would be blamed. By the time I made it back to my office and closed the door behind me, the envelope Rachel had given me felt like it weighed 10 pounds in my jacket. I pulled it out and set it on my desk. Something told me my name wasn't in it by accident. I put in a call to Sarah's office at the SL factory. Yes, Sarah worked for Jordan and Blake too. That's what Tony had been hinting at earlier. If this deal went south, I wouldn't be the only one out of a job. I could see Sarah getting the axe right along with me. Sarah and I had met way back when she first joined the old typing pool. Yeah, that phrase alone tells you how long ago it was. That pool was like its own little world back then, humming electric typewriters, cigarette smoke curling toward the ceiling, and a constant clatter that somehow kept everything running. She and I clicked from the start. There was just something about her, sharp, funny, not afraid to put me in my place. Over the years we became, well, something more. And even though a lot has changed since those early days, she still mattered to me more than I like to admit. There was only one time she ever truly hurt me. Henry Blake, the old man himself, had built this company from the ground up. And when it came time to divvy up shares, he handed plenty off to his sons, Tony and Robert. Me? Nothing. Not a single one. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd toss a few my way. I'd been there longer than both those guys. I'd carried this place on my back more times than I could count. But nope. No shares. And worse? When the board was restructured, both Blake brothers got seats. I didn't. Then Henry had his heart attack. I remember visiting him at the hospital. His voice was weak, but he still had that glint in his eye. He asked me to keep an eye on the boys. Sure, Henry. That would have been easier if you'd given me any real power, shares, a seat at the table, something. But of course I didn't say that out loud. What would have been the point? So here I was, babysitting a crumbling deal, a collapsing division, and two spoiled heirs, all without any leverage. And now, with this Johnson contract hanging in the balance, I had to fly out to the States at the last second. I picked up the phone and called Sarah to give her the good news. I swear you could probably hear her yelling all the way at Madison Square Garden. It sure blasted through my eardrum. "You promised me we'd go to the play tonight. What on earth made you say yes to New York?" This was our usual battle. Every time I had to travel for work, Sarah took it as a personal betrayal. Somehow, she convinced herself that work was just my excuse to avoid commitments. Or her. Or both. "I didn't volunteer, Sarah," I snapped. "It's not like I packed a bag for fun." "And maybe you didn't bargain for a few other things either," she fired back. "But you expect me to just deal with it every time. I'm not your assistant, you know." Then click. Line went dead. I stared at the receiver for a while. Why had I lost my temper? Why had she? I knew I owed her an apology, and I told myself I'd make it right when she met me at the airport later. But that didn't happen. I was standing at check-in, bags in hand, waiting at gate 11. No sign of Sarah. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. The airline clerk was just about to shut the desk down when she finally showed up. Sunglasses on, not a hair out of place, walking like she had all the time in the world. No apology. Not even a glance. And then just outside the glass I spotted the car. Slick, expensive, obnoxiously polished. Even from inside I could tell who was behind the wheel. Robert Blake. Nobody else ever got behind the wheel of his precious car. Not even Tony. And certainly not a chauffeur. Robert, who'd claimed he was too swamped to make the trip to New York himself, had time to drive my wife to the airport. I could feel my blood pressure rising. Of all the people, of all the lines, I was livid, absolutely seething as I stormed back through the terminal. My mind was spinning, trying to piece together what exactly I had just witnessed. It wasn't like me, but I ducked into the airport bar and ordered a stiff drink. Just one. I sat there nursing it for 20 minutes, staring at the condensation dripping down the glass, trying to calm myself down. I couldn't. Not really. But when my flight was called, I pulled myself together and headed toward the gate. On the flight to New York, my thoughts kept circling back to Robert. To Sarah. To why the hell he was driving her to the airport when he supposedly didn't have time for the trip. My stomach turned. When I landed, I was told I'd be staying at the Waldorf. That caught me off guard. The Waldorf Tower had always been Henry Blake's go-to whenever he was in town. Me. I usually stayed somewhere a bit more modest when I traveled solo. I wasn't one for flashy hotels or extravagant rooms, just didn't sit right with me. But Paul, one of the senior guys from our stateside office, met me outside and assured me the suite was already paid for. Company's dime, he said. Figured it was sitting empty. Right. Sure it was. I found it hard to believe the Blake brothers were suddenly feeling generous enough to foot a bill like this just for me. Something about all this, Sarah, Robert, the first-class travel, the penthouse suite, it was beginning to feel staged. As we pulled up to the hotel, Paul casually mentioned that it might be a good idea for me to get to know everyone on Johnson's board. That stopped me in my tracks. Everyone on their board? I asked. He just smiled and waved it off like it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal. None of this was adding up. I started wondering, was I being headhunted? Was Johnson and Partners trying to poach me away from Jordan and Blake? It would explain the red carpet treatment, the flattery, the fancy hotel and the dinner invitations. That night, we attended a lavish dinner hosted by Johnson's execs. Most of their board members were there, many with their spouses in tow. It was all top-shelf stuff, 5 courses, high-end wine, polished small talk. It was too polished if you ask me. Afterward we moved on to a swanky little nightclub. A few folks drifted toward the dance floor. I stayed off to the side, nursing a drink, watching everyone loosen up as the music pulsed under the soft lights. I'm not much of a dancer and I didn't feel like pretending to be one that night. At one point Petra, our company liaison for the trip, walked up to me. Well, you made a strong impression, she said with a smile, her voice a bit hesitant. They know who you are now. They trust you. She glanced at her watch. You better hurry or you'll be late for the morning briefing. Then just for a second her confidence cracked. She stumbled over her words and suddenly seemed eager to be anywhere but next to me. A second later she was gone, off to make herself scarce. To be honest, I hadn't really been listening to Petra anyway. My mind was elsewhere. I was still trying to get in touch with Sarah. I called her office back at the plant. The receptionist put me on hold, then came back sounding confused. There are no meetings scheduled between Robert Blake and Ms. Larkin today, she said. Actually, I don't think they've ever been formally introduced. I didn't respond. I just hung up, my heart sinking a little deeper. Just then Petra reappeared, poking her head into my room. You've got 10 minutes, she said, motioning toward the bathroom. You should shower and get dressed. They're expecting us. I rushed through breakfast, threw on my suit and we dashed out. We were a few minutes late arriving at the Johnson offices, but no one seemed to mind. The morning started with a round of handshakes, name badges and introductions, followed by a guided tour through their operation. We didn't actually sit down in the boardroom until almost 1 in the afternoon. I tried to stay focused but my thoughts kept drifting. I leaned over to Petra at one point and whispered, I don't know what's going on with Sarah. We had a pretty ugly fight before I left and now, she's not where I expected her to be. She's not answering your calls? I shook my head. Not once. Maybe she's still upset, she said gently. Maybe, I replied, though I didn't sound convinced. But there's this guy. I can't get hold of her, I told Petra later that day. And someone back home's feeding me lies. There's got to be a reason for that. Petra paused for a moment, giving me a knowing look. So that's why you're suddenly so eager to get back. I don't know what's going on, I admitted. But something's not right. If anyone from the UK calls for you, she said, I'll make sure they're transferred to me. I've been handling your calls, by the way, separately. Giving them all the same story. My wife called again, she added after a moment. She wanted to know when you'd be flying home. I told her you were booked on the Saturday evening flight. Is that okay? Yeah, I nodded. That's fine. I'll call her later on my mobile and back that up. Thanks, Petra. Keep me posted. Will do. And John, take care, all right? Yeah, I said. You too. So Sarah had reappeared. And now she was suddenly curious about my whereabouts. I had to ask myself, why? After all this time, after ignoring me, avoiding my calls, now she was concerned? Back in England, I found myself returning to our home later than I planned. Robert's car was parked in the driveway. Of course it was. As I stepped inside, I heard him clattering around in the kitchen. A few seconds later, his voice called out, "Where do you keep the coffee percolator?" "On the counter," Sarah called down from upstairs. "Well, it's not there," he shouted back. Then I heard her footsteps on the stairs coming down toward him. I stayed out of sight, listening. "Oh, you men are completely helpless without a woman to clean up after you," she said playfully as she entered the kitchen. "It should be right on the—" She stopped mid-sentence. "Oh my God." There was a long silence. Then she said it, barely a whisper, her voice tight with panic. "What are you doing here?" I stepped forward from the shadows of the hallway. The look on her face said everything. It wasn't guilt. It was fear that the illusion had finally shattered. I didn't say a word. She tried to recover, stumbling over half-formed excuses, calling through the door after me when I walked past her. "It's not what it looks like, John, I swear." I kept walking. She followed me out to the front, calling through the mailbox, trying to sound sincere. "Please let me explain. You've got it all wrong." But I had no interest in creating a scene. I refused to get into a shouting match on the front lawn. I stepped back into the living room, ignoring her voice as it turned to pleading. Some of the neighbors had started to notice, peeking out from behind their curtains, watching from porches and garden gates. It was that kind of neighborhood. Gossip traveled faster than the morning paper. When Sarah realized I wasn't going to engage, she changed her tactics. I heard her start banging on one of the front windows, her voice rising. "John, please, talk to me." She didn't see the edge of the flower pot. A sharp crack rang out, followed by the sound of shattering glass. A minute later, the sirens pulled up. She was still sobbing when the ambulance took her away. I stood there on the porch, watching, arms crossed, completely numb. And then I heard it, the unmistakable purr of Robert's Lamborghini pulling away behind the ambulance. I glanced over my shoulder and said to the officer, "Well, looks like she's decided she doesn't need me after all." He didn't respond. "If you'll excuse me, officer," I added calmly. "I've got a call to make. Window repair. And then, my solicitor." The officer mumbled something about hoping they wouldn't have to come back, then turned and walked off. It wasn't long before a repair guy showed up. Young guy, friendly, tried to make conversation as he worked. But after a few attempts he caught on. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. Once the window was boarded up, I went upstairs and did what I should have done months ago. I collected her credit cards, her keys, and I set them on the kitchen counter. She wouldn't be needing them here anymore. I watched through the front window as Sarah walked over to speak with the officer parked across the street. Eventually he climbed out of his patrol car. I couldn't hear their exchange, but I saw the moment he shrugged and shook his head. She kept talking, clearly pleading her case. After a few minutes, he gave a tired sigh and gestured toward a spot on the pavement, likely telling her and the others to wait there. Then he came up the steps and knocked on my door. "Your wife wants a word, sir," he said when I opened it. "And you do realize legally you can't stop her from entering the marital home." I nodded, calm on the outside but storming within. "You can tell her we've handled everything we need to handle," I said. "There's nothing left here for her." He looked like he wanted to say more but thought better of it and stepped away. Later that afternoon I stopped by the office. Not for long, just to tie up loose ends and clear out a few things. I asked Laura, the receptionist, if Tony was around. She shook her head. "He's not coming in today," she said. "Something going on?" I didn't sugarcoat it. I told her the truth, and to my surprise, her expression softened. "I'm really sorry to hear that," she said, voice low. "Honestly, I think he was avoiding you. He told me he figured you'd be handing in your resignation when you got back." Her eyes welled slightly as we talked. Whether it was for me or just from the weight of everything unraveling, I couldn't tell. But I appreciated it even if it stung. Tony's absence didn't sit right with me. After confronting his brother and watching the way this all unfolded, I thought he'd at least have the nerve to show up. Maybe face me. Maybe not. I shouldn't have expected more. The house sold faster than I'd anticipated. It was in a good neighborhood and I priced it to move. I didn't want to linger. I found a flat not far from the city center. Nothing fancy, just quiet. Something about it felt clean. No, work. I put that on pause. I figured I'd take a few months to breathe, regroup. Truth was, I still half expected Johnson and Partners to reach out with an offer. That potential was still hanging in the air, and I wasn't about to sign myself away somewhere else too quickly. As for Sarah, we saw each other a couple times. And every time it ended in disaster. We fought. Loudly. And not the kind of arguments that go anywhere, they were circular, bitter. She'd shout about how I was never there for her emotionally, and I'd fire back about betrayal, about trust. The irony was, we both said too much and not enough all at once. There was no middle ground left. Just scorched earth. One afternoon I had lunch with Simon Jarvis, an old client I'd worked with for years. He and his wife had just come back from a cruise and spent a while talking about the Mediterranean ports, their favorite wines, and how lovely the sunsets had been. But I could tell Simon had something else on his mind. He kept glancing over as if measuring when to bring it up. Eventually he shifted in his seat and said, "I was sorry to hear about Henry, and about everything going on with you and Sarah." I nodded, not really sure what to say. "I wish I could have stepped in sooner," he continued. "But I had to respect Henry's wishes." That stopped me. It wasn't just small talk anymore. There was something underneath that statement, like he'd been sitting on something for a long time. Then he reached into his briefcase and slid a small stack of papers across the table. "These documents," he said, "make you the primary shareholder in the holding companies Henry set up." I stared at the pages, stunned. Simon tapped the second envelope. "And these, they detail Henry's private accounts. Numbered ones. Offshore." I looked up at him. "For years he trusted you more than anyone. But he kept it hidden. Said the timing had to be right." For a moment I didn't know what to feel, validation, confusion, a strange twist of fate I hadn't seen coming. All I knew was that everything I'd believed about how the old man saw me, it had just shifted. Simon slid the last of the documents toward me with a quiet finality. "I was meant to hold on to this until Jordan and Blake went under," he said, his voice steady but low. "But after what those brothers pulled on you, I think you should have them now." I stared at the file, still stunned from the earlier bombshells. "Did you know," Simon added, "that under the terms of Henry's will, the Blake brothers were never legally allowed to fire you?" I blinked. "No, I didn't." "Well, they knew," Simon said flatly. "Which is probably why they orchestrated the entire thing with Sarah. They knew you'd walk away. That way you'd resign on your own and they wouldn't have to deal with the legal fallout." He paused to let that sink in. "There's more. You're now the primary shareholder in the consortium Henry formed before his death. Technically, you own most of the holding companies connected to Jordan and Blake." I shook my head, trying to process it all. "And no one knows?" "No one needs to," Simon replied. "For now. But you'll want to renegotiate the Johnson contracts when the time is right. And if I may, perhaps you'd consider inviting me to sit on your board. A merger between your companies and Johnson's could put you in an executive seat there too." He smiled faintly. "How does that sound, John?" I let out a long breath. "I don't get it. Why didn't Henry just leave the company to me outright?" Simon leaned back in his chair. "Because if he had, you'd be tangled in legal challenges for the next 20 years. He knew how to play the long game. He trusted you, just didn't want to set you up for a lifetime of court battles." He wasn't wrong. Henry had always been strategic, but I hadn't realized how far ahead he'd been thinking. Later, as I sat alone in my office, I found myself wondering about Sarah and Robert. How long had they been together behind my back? A year after I kicked her out, I saw her pushing a pram down Slow High Road. I didn't stop. Didn't even look twice. Last I heard, Robert was holed up somewhere near the Spanish coast, hiding out from law enforcement, just across the water from Morocco. Word was, he had a couple members of the drug squad on his heels. That's when I passed on a quiet tip. As for Tony? He ended up driving a bus through London's back streets. His wife left him not long after someone, maybe someone like me, shared a few details about a certain affair. Poetic justice, I guess. That afternoon, Simon handed me a letter. The envelope was simple, but the handwriting was unmistakable. "Sarah." I read it quickly, carefully, and without a word, pressed the intercom button. "Claire, can you see if Beatrice is in the building? Ask her to come up here when she's free." "Yes, sir," she replied. "I believe she's still in her office." I saw her earlier and she hasn't left since. A few minutes later, Beatrice arrived. I handed her the letter in silence. She scanned the pages, her eyes narrowing. Her breathing slowed, then deepened. "That vindictive little witch," she muttered. "Did you have any idea?" "No," I said simply. Beatrice straightened up. "We'll do everything we can for those kids, John." "All right." I nodded. "Let's go get them." "That's why you're here, isn't it, June?" June, the caseworker from social services, had been waiting quietly in the background. She stepped forward. "Mrs. Crawford claims they're your children," she said, holding up a copy of the same letter. "Given what's in here, I see no harm in placing them with you for now. But legally, until a judge rules otherwise, their custody remains under our care." "I understand," I said. "But you have my word they'll be safe. And loved." She smiled softly. "You'll need to keep me updated." "Of course," I said. "With your permission, we'll take them to my home in Swindon. There's plenty of space there. And quiet." I paused, then asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Will they get to see their mother?" June hesitated, then answered gently. "When the time is right." "I give you my word," I told June as we pulled away from the curb. "Those girls will be looked after. No matter what it takes." She gave me a small nod in return as if she believed me, really believed me. We dropped her off at the station where she'd left her car earlier. After a quick goodbye, Beatrice and I continued on to the hospital. The rules were adjusted a little to allow the girls into the ICU. I'd been bracing myself for tears, for panic, but they surprised me. No sobbing. No clinging. They were quiet, wide-eyed, taking it all in with the kind of strength that kids sometimes show when the world turns upside down. "They've got your eyes," Beatrice whispered beside me, watching them through the glass. She wasn't wrong. There was something familiar in their faces. A softness around the mouth. The shape of their brows. I had planned to order DNA tests just to be certain, but in that moment I decided not to. I didn't need science to tell me what I already knew in my gut. The drive to Wilshire was calm. The girls sat quietly in the back, tired but calm, soaking in the unfamiliar sights through the windows. It wasn't long before they started asking little questions. About the trees, the house, if there were pets. They were feeling it out, adjusting. By the time we arrived, preparations were already in place. One of the guest rooms, newly done up with twin beds and soft lighting, was waiting for them. The house staff welcomed them like family, gently whisking them off for snacks, baths, and stories. Beatrice and I stood in the hallway, momentarily forgotten. "Well," she said, watching the girls disappear down the hall. "That's a twist for the books." I nodded slowly. She never told me. Not once. She must have gone to great lengths to hide it. Think back, she would have been showing by that last meeting in the boardroom. The memory hit me like a wave. She had sat awkwardly, kept her coat on the whole time, claimed she was cold. I hadn't seen it then. But now, it was painfully clear. Later that evening, I made the call I'd been putting off. Sarah was awake and stable. I sat by her bed, saying little, letting the silence sit between us until she finally looked up. "I've taken care of your debts," I said gently. "The people you borrowed from, they're no longer a problem." Her eyes widened. "How did you?" "They showed up at your flat while one of my guys was there packing the girls' things. He told them to come back later. They did. And let's just say they won't be coming back again." She swallowed hard. "Why are you being so kind to me, John? After everything?" I didn't have a neat answer. Only this, because those girls deserve better than the mess we left behind. And so do you. We sat in silence again, this time less tense. Eventually she leaned back and said, "You know, I always thought they were watching me." "They were?" I said. She blinked. "They had private investigators, didn't they?" I nodded. "Did they follow me to Southampton? When I met with Simon and Johnson?" "Yes." A week later, 4 of the company's biggest contracts were suddenly cancelled. Johnson's included. She stared at the ceiling, half laughing. "They didn't see that coming, did they?" "No," I said. "But they should have." The bank pulling out hit them like a freight train. After that, it all came down fast. The police raided the house a few days later. She hesitated. "Did you know Robert was charged?" "I did." "And the others?" "Tony's working in transport now. His wife left him. And Robert? Last I heard, he's still hiding near the southern coast of Spain. Probably hoping the drug squad doesn't catch up to him." She was quiet for a long time. Then finally she asked, "So what now?" I stood, smoothing out my coat. "Now, I take the girls home. We build something steady. Something honest. And if a court decides they're not mine after all, I'll still be there. She nodded, her eyes wet but calm. Thank you. For what? For not walking away. You knew I was cheating on you, Sarah said softly. Why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you challenge me? I looked at her for a long moment. Because I didn't want to believe it, I replied. And if I had asked you, and you'd said yes, what was I supposed to do then? I exhaled slowly. I wasn't like you, Sarah. I wasn't strong enough to leave. I think I would have just stayed. Miserable. Numb. Pretending it wasn't happening. She nodded, her eyes far away. I thought you'd stopped loving me. I hadn't, I said quietly. But over time I started to doubt everything. Then that play came up, you remember, the one you really wanted to see? I promised I'd take you. She nodded again. But Robert was there instead. I know, I said. I thought you'd set me up, she admitted. That you knew. That you wanted to catch me in the act so you could divorce me. And that made me furious, not just with you but with myself. I was ashamed. I just didn't want to face it. She looked down at her hands, then back at me. I was going to tell you about the twins, she whispered. I had it all planned. The day we signed the divorce papers, I'd let you go first. Then right before you signed, I was going to tell you. I didn't want you to think I was using them to guilt you into staying. I just wanted you to have a choice. To know. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just nodded. Years have passed now. Sarah and I, we were a chapter that never truly closed, but life kept turning the pages anyway. The girls are older. They know what happened in pieces. And Beatrice, well, she's been by my side through it all. Somehow, over the years, she's become grandma, a title she says she's too young to hold, though the kids don't seem to care. To them, she's just love. Am I happy now? It's a complicated kind of happiness. I didn't get the life I thought I'd have. The woman I once loved is buried beneath stone and flowers. But I visit her every Sunday. Beatrice waits at the gate while I stand by the grave. I bring lilies in the spring, daffodils in the fall. I talk sometimes, just to let her know I didn't forget. Life goes on. And somehow, even after everything, it's a good life. Thanks for listening. If this story touched you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Have you ever stayed silent when your heart was breaking? Would you have done the same? And hey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We've got more stories to tell. Some messy, some healing, all human. See you in the next one.